Ghouls and Ghosts, developed by Capcom, released for the Sega Mega Drive in 1989. Let me tell you something about this game. You know how people always use the Dark Souls to define how hard something is? They'd be like, this is the Dark Souls of pizza, or Mario is the Dark Souls of platformers. This game redefines what I consider a difficult game. I feel like Dark Souls should be considered the Ghouls and Ghosts of modern games, not vice versa. I can't even begin to describe to you how much I love Ghouls and Ghosts and how much I loathe Ghouls and Ghosts. This is one of the first games I've played where I spent a lot of time playing it and collecting footage, so I really got to experience what this game has to offer. It is a run-and-gun platformer, kind of like Mega Man in a way. Actually, it's very similar to Mega Man. I guess the Capcom connection makes sense there. But you play as King Arthur, and it's your goal to take out Loki, or in the Japanese version, Lucifer. Can't say I did that. I'll explain that later. Basically, you run around and fight all sorts of hideous and horrible monsters and enemies, very similar to Castlevania, but I will say this plays, while it is similar in theme, it plays very differently to Castlevania. I might like it more than Castlevania. It's a very arcadey game. You get all kinds of different weapons and power-ups, and the health system's pretty neat too. You have armor, which basically acts as your first hit, and whenever you get hit by something, you lose your armor and go into boxer's mode, which is pretty awesome. If we're gonna have all these different games where you power up by getting naked, Ghouls and Ghosts is the first one where you power down by getting naked. Thank you, Ghouls and Ghosts, for being the first game where being naked makes sense. I found the platforming to be very unique. It has this weird physics to it, so when you start jumping in a direction, you're pretty much committed to it. You don't have the maneuverability as Mario does when he jumps, which is fine. It actually adds a cool dynamic to the game that makes you have to commit to everything you do. Very similar to another game that I mentioned earlier that everyone, including myself, likes to compare things to. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if Dark Souls picked up a thing or two from Ghouls and Ghosts. They're very comparable. As you progress through the game, you hit little checkpoints that are basically your restart position for every time you die. And oh, by the way, you will die a lot. Forget the Dark Souls tagline. Like, Dark Souls ain't got nothing on Ghouls and Ghosts death count. I cannot begin to tell you how many times I died trying to get through this game. But I love that it restarts you at a checkpoint as opposed to giving you a game over. And when you get a game over, all that happens is you lose your score. So it's very cool that I can continue to progress in the game and see everything it has to offer, even though I'm not very good at it. But I like that. I like it a lot. I don't mind its increased difficulty, given the fact that I can always restart at a checkpoint instead of having to restart the entire game. I wish more early games in general did this, as opposed to game over restart. I know they were trying to increase the playtime for their games, and restarting at the beginning is a great way to do that, but seriously, I can't thank this game enough for letting me be able to continue from a checkpoint. It's very cool. I appreciate that a lot. Thanks, Capcom. Oh yeah, and you want to know the most ridiculous thing about this game? So when you get to the end, or when you think you've got to the end, a cool little message pops up that's like, oh hey, you need a weapon to fight the final boss, and the only way to get that weapon is to replay the entire game from the start. That's so awesome! Thank you, Capcom! Remember how I said it was cool that I had to restart the game when I died? Well, you know, it's nothing like having to restart the game when you get to the end of it. So if you do want to fight Lucifer, you have to beat the game twice, basically. And the second time through, it seems like everything's just a little bit harder. I'm not sure if that's just perceived or if that's actually true. No, I'm pretty sure it's actually true. It's much harder. Restarting the game aside, the game is really, really fun, and I totally don't even mind having to play through it again, but I have not beaten it as of yet. It is a very difficult game, and it only becomes more difficult on its second playthrough, too. New Game Plus, anyone? Ha, just kidding. There's too much Dark Souls comparison going on right now. I know that drives people crazy. Despite its difficulty, it's a super fun game, and I love it so much. The music, the art style, the cute little boxers King Arthur wears, everything about this game is just dripping with fun, charmingness, and I love it to death. Ghouls and Ghosts, where have you been my whole life? I need you. now I have you. I love you, Ghouls and Ghosts. It was only a matter of time before we had to talk about a licensed movie game. And Rambo III, released by SEGA in 1989, is the first of many, I'm sure. Falling in line with every licensed movie game, Rambo III is lackluster in every regard. Upon first inspection, it looks like a Metal Gear clone, which excited me because I thought it'd be more tactical and sneaky and run and gun when it needed to be. But it turns out it's really just a top-down shoot-'em-up. You're more concerned with avoiding bullets than you are with shooting people. One hit from a bullet will kill you. And this is what upsets me the most about the game. You are John Rambo, a combat-hardened warrior who in the movies takes knife wounds, bullet wounds, bomb wounds, and just walks it off. But here, for whatever reason, the entire purpose of the game is to dodge bullets coming at you because one bullet hit kills you. This blow is kind of softened by the fact that you have 3 lives, technically, 2, 1, and 0. But it still doesn't feel right. I would have preferred they'd given me a health bar that had like 3 hits. So at least mentally I'm thinking, yeah, I just took a bullet and it took away 1 hit. But lives? Come on. It doesn't make any sense. I will say that I am happy that when you run out of your 2 lives, it's not game over, start from the beginning. It's game over, restart the level. But you just don't feel powerful at all. And Rambo is a character that is all about physical strength and power. The game gives you 4 different weapons to use. There's your standard combat rifle, which you can hold down and shoot infinitely, which is probably the most useful of the bunch. You also have a knife, which allows you to do a short-range stab attack, which seems absolutely useless. A bow and arrow, which you have to charge up to fire, that also seems incredibly useless. And bombs, which are actually incredibly useful for taking out sniper towers and vehicles. So, 2 out of the 4 weapons I used. The other 2, not so much. The game is played from a top-down perspective, where you're trying to get from point A to point B without dying, which is a lot harder than it should be given that I'm John Rambo. That aside, after you beat a mission, it switches to a behind-the-shoulder third-person view, where you have to shoot at helicopters and other vehicles, as I'm told. I didn't get past the 2nd level, so I never saw another vehicle to fight. These boss fights are ridiculously annoying, because every time you shoot your bow, you stop moving. So it basically becomes about timing and patterns to beat the boss, and there's really no skill required whatsoever. You just learn the pattern, you rinse, lather, repeat, blow up the helicopter with a bow and arrow. Yes, I know he did that in the movie, but it just seems even more ridiculous in game form. This is one of those games that makes you wonder if the studios actually watched the source material before they made the game, or if they just had some bullet points to reference. It just doesn't feel good at all. And it's unfortunate because I think Rambo is the kind of material that would be so easy to make into an amazing video game. Heck, I always thought the original Far Cry was a Rambo game that just couldn't get the license for it. If you're looking for super awesome John Rambo action, look elsewhere, because this game is your worst nightmare. Forgotten Worlds by Capcom, released for the Genesis and Mega Drive in 1989. A game that must be played with 2 players for maximum fun,
Yes.
Hence why I brought in Kite Tails to talk about it.
And you found that out how?
So I tried playing the single player by myself and died in the 2nd level with a game over.
So you called in the big guns for reinforcement.
That's right.
And I was pleasantly surprised to see that it was actually super fun.
It's a game that is intended to be played with 2 people.
I think so, because the 2 of us together, we were kind of this unstoppable force.
The game is a floaty shoot-'em-up, similar to Space Harrier 2, where you play as a dude who floats around with a gun.
Right, and this one it is just it's a crawling screen, so you can't really stop.
Right.
Or go back.
Right. It's just 2 dudes shooting with satellite shooting controls, which is interesting.
Yeah, that was pretty interesting. Instead of aiming the traditional up, down, left, right, you had to press the buttons and it would rotate. And it rotated counterclockwise and clockwise. So you kind of had to time that with the enemies come from all directions too. They're coming from the back, the front. So there were times when we could synchronize.
Yeah, we'd get together and we'd just shoot in opposite
Someone
directions.
would go clockwise, the other counterclockwise. And that worked for a little bit.
Yeah.
I was glad to see, though, that the game wasn't too difficult because I know that a lot of these older games are incredibly tough to beat.
Yeah. Well, it's only not difficult because of the 2-player. Because
Yeah,
when you
that's
died,
true.
you could respawn. But in 1-player, when you died, it's game over and you have to restart.
So that makes me think a lot of those games that were too difficult that you've already been through, if you had a second player, might be easier.
Yeah, maybe. I'm going to have to bring you in for more of these things, I think.
Yes.
The game had awesome music.
It did.
And you even mentioned it didn't really seem like it fit the style
No,
of the game.
it didn't.
But it's super catchy nonetheless.
It's very catchy. It sort of reminded me of RPG, like an RPG game.
Yeah, like Final Fantasy music.
Right.
Yeah.
It was very good. They had a really neat little shop feature as well where you could buy upgrades and whatnot. Really, really pleased to see that the upgrades weren't so expensive. We could afford like multiple purchases every time we stopped
Some
at
of
the
them
shop.
were, but we could
Some of
afford
them.
something every time we stopped
Right.
there, and it made our game easier.
It did, and you could purchase little clues that told you about the bosses and whatnot. So that was pretty neat,
And you don't lose your upgrades when you die.
which was super important to me because I died a lot.
And apparently this was based on an old arcade game that came out a year before, so I'm wondering if that's why you keep the upgrades on 2-player, because it's like you're putting a coin in.
Oh, yeah.
To bring you back?
Yep, true.
Yeah. So that would make a lot of sense. All in all, this game was really fun, but we did beat it in 30 minutes.
We did. We kind of just powered through it.
But I love it.
I liked it. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a super neat little thing. I'm glad we could beat it because a lot of games that we've tried, 2-player, old games, we just couldn't beat. So it was neat to actually get to the ending of this without needing to use any cheats or infinite lives.
We're just 2 super soldiers going to fight the bad guys.
2 brothers that hate the bad guys. I also liked how the 2 characters were distinctive enough. You have this really cool, typical white guy, and then you have his black brother.
Yeah, his black brother.
Were they
Well, I don't
really
know,
brothers?
I don't think they were brothers.
Okay, they weren't brothers, but
They were both.
they were just bros.
According to the Wikipedia description, they were cloned soldiers.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah.
But I thought it was cool that they were distinct enough because a lot of these games, it's just like, oh, everyone thinks of Luigi as Green
Mario.
Green Mario.
Yeah, you
But
actually
this
have
was-
2 distinct looking.
Yeah, this was neat. It was neat to see that in an older game, though.
It was also neat to see that when you got the armor power up,
Right.
you actually see the armor.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, they did a good job with it. I like it.
Forgotten Worlds. Hopefully not too forgotten.